Austin. He was the Assistant Dean of Student Affairs in the 70s. In the 80s, he served for many years as the chair of the faculty committee that coordinated the university's offering in biblical studies, so a strong background in religion. He assisted in laying the foundation for the Department of Religious Studies at University of Texas, Austin. And from 1989 to 1998, he directed the graduate program for the Department of History. He's won a lot of university awards at Texas, Liberal Arts Council Award, the Harry Ransom Award, the Gene Holloway Award, the Friar Centennial Teaching Fellowship, and in 2009, he received one of the inaugural, I guess this is through the state of Texas, system-wide teaching awards for teaching excellence, the Regent's Outstanding Teaching Award. He's a really good speaker. No pressure. He retired from University of Texas a few years ago, and if you Google him, you will see the retirement party. There's lots of stuff about him leaving and lots of fine testimonials. So, without any further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Miller.
Thank you, Larry. Let me build my nest here. Now, I have to wear my computer glasses to read my lecture, but that means that you all become very fuzzy. So bear with me. And I'm delighted to be here yet again. This is kind of my home away from home. I really love the people up here. I don't particularly love it when it's hot as here. When it's hot here, you laugh. Hot as here as it is in Texas. Not quite, but it's getting there. Now, I've got a couple of things to say to start with. I always, when I lecture on Ben Hur, I'm going to put these back on so I can see who actually all out there. When I lecture on Ben Hur, everywhere else, I tell them the kind of the plot and the characters and everything, but there is one place in the world where I refuse on principle to do this, and you're it. Now, I know that you all haven't read the book, but there is, I will tell you something, there is probably a greater percentage per capita of people in this room who have read at least part of Ben Hur than anywhere on the planet. Wear it proudly. Okay? So, I'm going to assume, although you don't, that you know the plot well, and you're going to bear with me as I jump around in the plot. So, if you get confused, that's okay, it's the summertime. And we'll catch you up at the end. So, don't worry about it. Now, I read my lectures. I've done it for a long time, and I'm very good at it. But on the way up here, remember, some of you heard me last October, I said that I had never read the book before, but I would listen to it. I would listen to it on my CD millions of times. But I actually read the book. I told you I was going to read the book, and you should too. Did you? Yeah, you lied to me. So I actually read the book, and I learned lots of things. Actually, it was quite interesting. But on the way up here, I made the mistake of putting my CD in again, and I hadn't listened to it for a while. And as I drove for 3 long days, partly through Arkansas, I started thinking, every time I see, I've got to put that in my lecture. So I started taking notes. By the time I got here, I was a nervous wreck, and I had 12 pages of typed notes that somehow I had to put in a lecture I'd already written. I got here on Monday night, and I just thought, I've got to sort of do it. And so I finally decided, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to give a lecture without a text. I'm going to have an outline. So I wrote an outline, and then in my little room, big room actually, at the Holiday Inn, I tried to do it. Getting the image, it's an old man in this hotel room, who's next door, talking, trying to extempore. I couldn't do it. It was awful. So I'm going to read my lecture. Larry tells me I have you for an hour. I think this lecture is about 35 to 40 minutes long. Okay? We'll see. Here we go. General Wallace, on several occasions in the 1880s, attributed the origins of Ben Hur to a chance encounter he had on a train, probably in 1876, with the great infidel, Robert Green Ingersoll, the nation's leading religious skeptic. Wallace listened spellbound as the nation's foremost atheist demonstrated that he knew much more than Wallace about the essentials of Christian doctrine. It really affected him. Shamed by Colonel Ingersoll's superior understanding of Christianity, Wallace determined to study for himself the life of Jesus and the origins of Christianity. Out of that decision grew the general's Life of the Christ. By the time he died in 1907, Lew Wallace, 1905, Susan died in 1905, Lew Wallace had constructed an elaborate explanation of how I came to write Ben Hur, and he actually even wrote it and published it, at the center of which was the 1876 encounter with Ingersoll. Now, as you can read on the wall right there, have you read that? That central assertion has recently been called into serious question by a graduate student of the study zone, Chandler Lighty. You know Chandler, some of you? This student decided to do what someone should have done a long time ago. Check to see what, if anything, the great infidel himself had to say about Wallace's claim that Ingersoll played a central role in calling into being one of the best-selling religious novels of all time. The student checked in the published correspondence of Ingersoll and found an 1887 letter from one James K. Vardaman of Greenwood, Mississippi. Have you ever heard of James K. Vardaman? As the governor of Mississippi in the late 18th and early 19th, early 20th century, Jim Vardaman became one of the most notorious white supremacists in America at the turn of the 20th century. But for some reason, in 1887, a very young Jim Vardaman, for some reason, wrote Ingersoll to ask for his response to Wallace's claim about the conversation on the train. Ingersoll replied, rather tartly, as he often did, not as tartly as Lew Wallace could sometimes, that he had never met Lew Wallace. In the discussion, we of course will never know for sure if the two men met and talked in the way that the general asserted, but it is rather inconvenient for Wallace's carefully crafted origin story that Ingersoll insisted it never happened. There is another part of that origin story. Wallace claimed that in researching and writing his tale of the Christ, he came to accept fully the basic truth claims of the Christian gospel, towards which he had heretofore been essentially indifferent. The claim that he was converted to believe in Christianity in the process of writing Ben Hur is the part of the origin story that I want to examine with you this evening by paying very close attention to several conversion experiences we find in Wallace's novel, most especially the conversion of Judah Ben Hur himself. But let's begin by saying what we can about Wallace's own spiritual and religious life. One of the more remarkable things about Lew Wallace's early life is that for a variety of reasons, he was raised largely outside the formative influence of the domestic woman's sphere of church and state that was becoming so dominant in Jacksonian America. In that respect, he reminds me of no one as much as Samuel Langhorne Clemens, Mark Twain, who, like Harriet Beecher Stowe's slave Topsy, just growed without any supervision. As a married adult in Crawfordsville, Lew Wallace attended the Methodist Church rather faithfully, and the publication of Ben Hur seems to have made little difference in his religious life. But notice that if Wallace claimed to have been converted to Christianity by writing Ben Hur in the second half of the 1870s, he obviously did not think that his membership in the Crawfordsville Church in the years before necessarily made him a Christian. Think about it. The fact is that the scholar will have a very difficult time in reconstructing anything like an interior life of Lew Wallace. Good luck. Or for that matter, Susan Elston Wallace, or, God forbid, Henry Lane Wallace, their son. This is not, to say the least, an emotionally valuable family. But this reticent and apparently emotionally constrained man, Lew Wallace, left us a singularly rich novel that delves deeply into religious and spiritual experiences. So, with that background, let's turn to Ben Hur and the subject of religious conversion. One of the most important and first conversion experiences recorded in the history of Christianity is the dramatic experience of Saul of Tarsus while he was on the road to Damascus to persecute the early Christian church. He is struck from his horse by a great light, out of which he hears the voice of Jesus give him instructions. Notice it's not the voice of God. Who are you? I am Jesus, whom you persecute, not God, Jesus. He was then rendered blind and powerless for 3 days. After which he became Paul, the most important of the founders of Christianity. Now, the conversion of Saul to Paul may be seen as a prototype for a kind of conversion experience that became dominant in the evangelical Protestant culture in which Lew Wallace wrote Ben Hur. It could be defined as a never-to-be-forgotten, once-in-a-lifetime, dramatic encounter with divinity that forever transforms the essence of the individual. It is safe to say that Lew Wallace never had anything like this kind of conversion experience. But in Ben Hur, he describes such a conversion as if he had experienced it. It is so sensitively done. Now, if you read the novel, you may be wondering, what is Dr. Miller talking about? There is no such dramatic conversion experience in Ben Hur. Well, you're right, in a way. But that's because we don't call the healing of the lepers that is at the center of the book a conversion experience, but a miraculous cure. But let me try to convince you that in the healing of the lepers, our general penned one of the most sensitive descriptions of the evangelical conversion experience ever written. So let's talk now about the mother and sister of Judah Ben Hur, the lepers who are cured. In the early pages of Ben Hur, Wallace is at great pains to present Judah's mother, who in the novel has no name, by the way, as a faithful daughter of Israel who is thoroughly acquainted with the prophecy of the Messiah, who will come from God to rule over the Jews. After the Roman procurator is almost killed by a falling roof tile of her home, Judah's mother is imprisoned with her daughter Tirzah in a cell infected with leprosy. There the Princess of Hur maintains her Jewish faith steadfastly, even as the disease turns the women into unrecognizable horrors of affliction. When they are finally released from prison, they make their way to the Valley of the Lepers, where they are discovered and then cared for by their faithful slave, the Egyptian Amram. Judah, upon returning from Rome and defeating Messala in the chariot race, told you I was going to skip around, becomes a disciple of Jesus and follows the Nazarene for 3 years, observing the miraculous ministry of Jesus even as he raises 3 legions to support the Nazarene if and when Jesus announces himself as the King of the Jews. Judah regularly returns to the Hur palace in Jerusalem and reports on the miracles of Jesus to his household. Eyewitness accounts, which now includes the steward Simonides and his daughter Esther, the Egyptian wise man Balthazar and his daughter Iris, and the slaves Malach and Amra. Amra hears her beloved master tell of Jesus' healing 10 lepers. Because the story comes from Judah, the woman believes it instantly, reliable witness, and hurries away to tell her mistress and Tirzah the good news. She becomes like Judah, an evangelist for Jesus. She breaks the age-old taboo of touching lepers and urges him to go with her to the city where Jesus is about to arrive. Like Amra, the mother believes the story not only because it sounds like the beloved story of the Messiah, but also because the story comes from Judah. And that's good enough for her. So it is that, with Amra's help, the 2 lepers make their way to a place where Jesus is sure to pass on his way into Jerusalem, on what we now call Palm Sunday. On the way, they encounter a follower of Jesus who is on his way into the city to prepare lodgings for the Nazarene and his followers. They expect to be shunned by him or stoned, but he instead speaks freely to the women because he does not fear their disease, since Jesus can so easily heal them of it. And he tells them what to say when calling out to Jesus. They follow his instructions. Jesus arrives, and despite the tumult of the thousands of his followers, He sees them in all of their distress and need, by the side of the road, feebly calling out to him. Jesus stops. The mother proclaims that he is the Messiah, and Jesus declares that her faith has made her whole again, and rides off. Oops. When the noise of the singing afar was a sound scarcely heard, the miracle began. And here is Lew Wallace's description of an evangelical conversion experience. There was first in the hearts of the lepers a freshening of the blood. Then it flowed faster and stronger, thrilling their wasted bodies with an infinitely sweet sense of painless healing. Each felt the scourge going from her. Their strength revived. They were returning to be themselves. Directly, as if to make the purification complete, from body to spirit the quickening ran, exalting them to a very fervor of ecstasy. The power possessing them to this good end was most nearly that of a draught of swift and happy effect. Nice drink of water. Yet it was unlike and superior in that its healing and cleansing were absolute, and not merely a delicious consciousness while in progress, but the planting, growing, and maturing all at once of a recollection so singular and so holy that the simplest thought of it should be of itself ever after a formless yet perfect thanksgiving. If you are an evangelical Christian converted in one of these experiences, you are to remember everything that happened to you as you are transformed. Now, let's turn to the conversion of Wallace's hero, Judah Ben Hur, a process that serves as an organizing principle and something like a leitmotif for Wallace's novel. From the moment Judah is introduced, Wallace is at great pains to present him as a true son of Israel and a veritable model of a young Jewish Sadducee. Unlike the young Lew Wallace, Judah Ben Hur was raised by his mother to be very familiar with the beliefs and rituals of his Jewish faith. The first scene in the book in the Hur household sees the Princess of Hur effortlessly but very carefully answer her son's questions about his future as a Jewish male. The conversation develops almost as a catechism, the mother being exquisitely careful that she not say or do anything that would cause her precious son to question or turn against his faith. The conversation between Judah and his mother is a good example of the usual way in which the young are bonded to their religion of births, a process that has nothing to do with a sudden, dramatic conversion experience. In Wallace's day, the vast majority of religious denominations, including the Methodist Church, with which he would later become identified, call this process Christian nurture, raised in the faith, in which the young were carefully reared in the traditions of their denominations, which they will then eventually affiliate themselves with, usually as young adults. Judah, who is 17, tells his mother that Messala, his young Roman boyhood friend, who has now returned from Rome, had just tried to convert him away from his Jewish faith, which Messala both belittled and ridiculed. Mother's response is interesting. She remembered back to the two boys' youth when they were inseparable and observed that since Judah and Messala had been so close as boys, she had always thought that the Roman might have become a convert to Judaism, a proselyte, she thought. But instead, he goes back to Rome and comes back a Roman. One day after that conversation, a tile fell from the roof of the Hur palace and struck Valerius Gratus, the new Roman procurator. The Romans turned their fury on the aristocratic house of Hur, and within another day, the shattered mother and daughter were in prison, and a dazed Judah was staggering with a Roman escort toward the Galilean countryside, condemned to a life as a galley slave. Wallace invented for Ben Hur an incident in the boyhood of Jesus. This is fascinating. Ben Hur is written just as fundamentalism begins to emerge, in which conservative Christians are insisting that every word of the Scripture is precisely accurate and you need nothing else. Lew Wallace is here adding things to the Scriptures. That's really a remarkable fact. At the well at Nazareth, a young carpenter takes pity on the staggering slave, who was his own age, and gave him water to drink. Judah felt a hand on his head, and, quote, looking up, he saw a face he never forgot. Never forgot. The face of a boy about his own age, shaded by locks of yellowish, bright chestnut hair. Lew Wallace goes into a big shtick earlier about how Mary and Jesus have yellow hair. A face lighted by dark blue eyes. At the same time, so soft, so appealing, so full of love and holy purpose, that they had all the power of command and will. The spirit of the Jew, hardened though it was by suffering, and so embittered by wrong that its dreams of revenge took in all the world, melted under the stranger's look. So, it turns out that Judah Ben Hur, like his soon-to-be leprous mother and sister, himself had had a dramatic and transforming encounter with the Nazarene at a crucial turning point in his life. Wallace spends very little time on the 3 years that Judah labored at the oar as a galley slave, but presents him as Ben Hur's dark night of the soul that had the final effect of strengthening, even hardening, his allegiance to his Jewish faith and his God, in whom he places his entire hope and trust. Judah saves the life of the ship's captain. Moving right along, Judah saves the life of the ship's commander, the tribune Quintus Arrius, who then takes him to Rome, adopts him as his son and heir, and allows him to train as a gladiator and charioteer. Wallace spends no time at all on Judah's years in Rome, which I think is fascinating. And we next encounter the young man, now a sophisticated Roman aristocrat, as well as a Jewish prince, in Antioch, where he makes his way, finally, to the celebrated Grove of Daphne. The Grove of Daphne section in Ben Hur is one of the strangest things, and I can never figure out what it's doing there until I started thinking about conversion. So here we go. Although we do not see Judah experiencing Rome, we see the results of those 5 Roman years as Ben Hur encounters the temptations of the pagan grove as a Roman tourist. Wallace emphasizes that the years in Rome had tended to make Judah even more religiously tolerant than he already was, but as he tours the grove and witnesses the sexual license that it encouraged, sexual license at least is presented by Lew Wallace, Ben Hur's basic Jewish nature reasserts itself and he flees from the grove, which is a good thing because Judah is being observed while touring the grove. On the previous day, work with me here, he had introduced himself in Antioch to Simonides, the steward of the house of Hur, who had been horribly deformed and tortured and deformed by the Romans in an unsuccessful effort to force him to divulge the location of the Hur fortune. Judah revealed himself to Simonides as the heir to the house of Hur, which means he's his master, who instantly recognized him but did not say so. Instead, to test Judah, he dispatched his faithful servant Maluk to follow and observe Ben Hur as he made his way to the city to see what kind of a man he had become. Simonides, who was fanatically devoted to the idea of the Messiah who would drive the Romans from Jerusalem, needed to be assured that the man who claimed to be the heir to the Hur fortune was as devoted to the cause of the Messiah as he was. Maluk followed Judah and observed the young man resist the temptations of the grove, proving that he remained a true son of Israel despite his years in Rome. In other words, unlike Messiah, Judah Ben Hur had not been corrupted by the pagan culture on the banks of the Tiber. His Jewish self having reasserted itself in the face of Daphne's temptation, Judah then faces Messiah in the great chariot race and defeats the proud Roman. The climactic race occurs about 2/3 of the way into Wallace's novel. In the last third of Ben Hur, Wallace brings his story about the fortunes and misfortunes of the Hur family ever closer to his tale of the Christ. And this part of Wallace's narrative is dominated by the struggle of Judah Ben Hur to understand the character of Jesus of Nazareth and the nature of the kingdom he would establish. Judah's final conversion experience is a direct result of that struggle. Wallace gives over all or parts of almost a dozen of the novel's chapters to what is in effect an ongoing debate, an argument, if you will, between the Jewish steward Simonides and the Egyptian magus Balthasar as to the nature of the Nazarene and more precisely the nature of the kingdom of Jesus that he will establish on earth. Judah is often the only audience for that debate. And those debates are interesting because they are invariably a sustained, reasoned, rational weighing of evidence. Balthasar, who of course saw the infant Jesus in his manger, returned to Judea as an old man to witness the beginning of the Holy Child's adult ministry. The Egyptian argues forcefully that Jesus has come not as an earthly king of the Jews, but as a savior of souls, not to the Jews only, but to the entire human race. That's what those first chapters about the wise men are for, to establish that fact. Simonides, on the other hand, insists stubbornly, obstinately, obdurately, words like that are all over the place, insists that the miraculous Nazarene is simply the long-promised Jewish Messiah who will lead the children of Israel in revolt against Rome and restore the kingdom of Israel to its Solomonic glory. End of story. For his part, from the beginning of the debate, Ben Hur, the true son of Israel that he is, sides instinctively and fervently with Simonides. Got it? When Judah discovers that his mother and sister have vanished and are presumably dead, he dedicates his now stupendous fortune to support the Messiah in his struggle against Rome. To that end, he forms a political alliance with Simonides and with Sheikh Ilderim, the Arab who owns the horses with which Judah defeated the Solomon. Thus supported, Judah proceeds to raise and train 3 legions. Folks, this is a lot of people. Legions of young Galileans whom he recruits for the holy cause. See, if you've just seen the 1959 film, you would be totally lost. Are you? It's okay. As I mentioned earlier, Judah regularly returns to the Hur Palace and gives to his people his eyewitness account of the miracles he himself has seen Jesus perform. Wallace gives over an entire chapter to one such recital. The testimony that, as we've seen, leads the servant Amra to get the lepers to Jesus to be cured. But that testimony is also a very important part of the final conversion of Judah to Christianity. Judah reports to his friends that his observations of Jesus had persuaded him, 1, that the Nazarene is in fact a man, thoroughly human, but that he is, 2, somehow more than a man. Judah is now trying to figure out just how Jesus is more than a man, and he drives you crazy because he spends just days trying to figure this out. He is so dunderheaded. Jesus would perform some incredible miracles. I don't understand what's going on here. So anyhow, he asks his friends, he's talking to all these assembled friends, he asks them a series of questions. Folks, it's just like a catechism or something. He asks a series of questions, each of which begins with this question. What would you say of a man who, fill in the blank? So let's fill in the blank. What would you say of a man who can turn water into wine, can make the blind see, can feed thousands with 7 loaves and 2 fishes, can vanish into thin air, can heal the sick, and finally can conquer death? What would you say? Judah insists that he has seen with his own eyes Jesus do all of those miraculous things. And he ate of the miraculous loaves and fishes. We're not talking just about eyesight, we're talking about tasting a miracle, sensory perception. And he told his hearers where they could go find Lazarus, Jesus' beloved friend who had just died and now lives again, healed by the Nazarene. Don't believe me? Go see him. with your own eyes. Will you believe me? You're your lying eyes. Okay. In the last chapters of Ben Hur, the Hur family and Jesus finally come together in the week of Jesus' passion that began with his triumphal entry into Jerusalem on what we now know as Palm Sunday. But, dunderhead that he is, even at this late date in Jesus' ministry, Judah still has not yet determined to his own satisfaction the true nature of the Nazarene and his proposed kingdom. In a coincidence that happens only in Victorian novels, Ben Hur happened to be among the throng of people who followed Jesus into the holy city on Palm Sunday. He then saw Jesus stop before the two prophetic leprous women who call out to him for mercy. In other words, he was an eyewitness to the miraculous transformation of his mother and sister. He, of course, did not recognize the wretched lepers. They were not recognizable. But immediately recognized Amra, who supported them. And he kind of figured, what's Amra doing there? He finally figures it out. As the women were cured and Judah finally recognized his family, he struggles mightily to understand what his eyes were telling him. Finally, after they are reunited, Judah demands to know from his mama, what sort of man could do what he had just seen? You explain to me, Mom. His mother replied that we can know the source of Jesus' power by the uses to which he puts it. And he asked him, what use does he put to it? And he replies that he does only good. He must be of God. In the 5 days between Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem and his crucifixion, Judah is with the Master every minute he is not with his reunited family. Folks, he lived with Jesus and the disciples for 3 full years. Completely disappears in the adaptation tradition. Ben Hur accompanies Jesus as he enters the city and approaches the temple, where his followers expect him to proclaim himself the Messiah before the gate beautiful. This is a major turning point in the story. Jesus is going to enter and he's going to proclaim himself Messiah before the beautiful gate beautiful. In astonishment and disappointment, Judah watches as Jesus instead turns away, symbolically renouncing earthly political power. Wallace then puts Judah Ben Hur directly into the scriptural account of the evening at Gethsemane and the arrest of Jesus, a scene that turns out to be pivotal in Judah's conversion. Not content to make up the story about the well, he now actually puts Judah into this part of the passion of Jesus. Walking along in Jerusalem, Judah sees a crowd of soldiers leading a man out of the city. He follows them and recognizes the man as the disciple Judas Iscariot. He follows the crowd to the garden known as Gethsemane and witnesses the betrayal of Jesus by Judas and his later arrest. He watches anxiously, hoping that he still expects Jesus to proclaim himself, hoping that Jesus will now assert his power and authority. Instead, what does he do? He asks the soldiers to let his followers go. And then what does he do? He heals somebody. Remember Peter hacks off the servant's ear? He puts it back. Suffer you so? This gets to Judah. Now thoroughly confused. Ben Hur, more confused, I should say. Ben Hur decides to follow the soldiers, and in order to make himself less conspicuous and to move more quickly, he takes off his outer garment and leaves it on the wall of the Garden of Gethsemane. He gets close enough to the bound Nazarene, who now seems calmly resigned to his fate, to speak to him. Judah hurriedly asks Jesus if he will accept aid if he brings it. Wallace writes, the Nazarene never so much as looked up or allowed the slightest sign of recognition. Whereupon the mob, assuming that Ben Hur is one of the disciples, lays hold on Judah, who now flees, but not before one of the mob tears his inner garment away from him, forcing Judah to run away from the garden naked. Wallace, in this audacious way, literally inserts his hero into the scriptural account of the passion of Jesus Christ. Judah Ben Hur, Lew Wallace's Judah, becomes the young man who runs away naked in the Gospel of Mark's account of the betrayal and arrest of Judas. That the man is probably the young John Mark, but Wallace makes him Judah Ben Hur. The scene is crucial, though, not for that reason, but because for the first time at the garden, Judah begins to feel that he might be working against the will of God. On the next day, what we call Good Friday, Judah learns that his Galilean legions, who also saw Jesus turn away from the great, beautiful, and renounced power, had deserted him and are now part of the mob calling for his death. Without his legions, Judah is rendered powerless to bring military aid to the assistance of the Nazarene. The desertion of his army seems to have solidified Ben Hur's growing realization that he has been warring blasphemously against the will of God. With that realization, Ben Hur becomes impassive, as helpless in what he later called his dream state, as Saul had been during those 3 days of blindness in Damascus. In an almost dazed condition, Judah, who had become one of the very few people in Jerusalem who could have maybe successfully intervened in the arrest of Jesus, fouled it all up, is now under the power of the Spirit and is as powerless as Saul had been. So he simply gathers his family and friends and joins the great procession that follows Jesus to Calvary. Wallace places Judah, Simonides, Esther, and Balthazar at the foot of the cross, where Ben Hur observes at very close range the crucifixion and death of the Nazarene. Wallace's Jesus is Isaiah's man of sorrows. He is resigned to endure his divinely ordained fate and suffer all as he has to drink of the cup that his Father has given him. Judah, seeing Jesus on the cross, dying, remembers the scene at the well at Nazareth and tries to give Jesus water to drink. He fails, but instead sees and hears Jesus talking to one who seems to be very near. This is one of the beautiful parts of the story, actually. He sees Jesus look to someone very near, and says softly, "Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." Judah Ben Hur is right there. And when Jesus is finally dead, it is finished. It is Judah Ben Hur, not the Roman centurion, who proclaims, "Truly, this was the Son of God." And a great peace descends upon our Prince of Jerusalem, now and forevermore, a convert to Christianity. Let us now see what we can say in general about Judah's conversion. As Wallace describes Judah's, and actually Simonides too, responses to the actions and teachings of Jesus, and work with me here, I'm not sure if this is clear. As he talks about the way that they worked out who Jesus is, he lays out something, Wallace lays out something like a theory of cognition, how we know, even an epistemology, a theory about how we come to have beliefs. How do you believe? How do you know things? How do you believe what you believe? You just saw God work. God is good. You know what epistemology is? Do you? Maybe something. How do we know? How do we know? Big word. How do you know? So over and over again, and I came up with this about March, I think. I began to notice that in discussing amongst themselves about, or in Wallace, just talking about them, discussing amongst themselves, that they began to use words that are basically part of cognition systems. The process is a rational, dare I say even a scientific one. Belief starts with ideas. You have an idea that almost mechanically becomes a sensation, getting more senses into it, sensation, that in turn matures into impressions, that finally harden into resolves, conclusions, and beliefs. As both Judah and Simonides finally perceived the true nature of Jesus' mission on earth, they use terms like enlightenment, understanding, and speaking of seeing now with a new or a different eye. Simonides calls it the eye of perfect faith. This process ends with faith, but it is indeed a process that begins and has an end. It has a cause and effect process. Lew Wallace takes his reader through this process carefully and sensitively as Judah Ben Hur ceases to be a true son of Israel and becomes a follower of the miraculous Nazarene, a Christian. Now, why is all that important? Ben Hur was published in 1880, right in the middle of what one scholar has famously called the spiritual crisis of the Gilded Age. In the era immediately following the Civil War, biblical scholars, both in Europe and the United States, began to use what was called the higher criticism to question the historicity of the miraculous elements of the Christian scriptures. Scholars like Francis Ernst Renan began at the time what comes to be called the quest for the historical Jesus. They used the rational methods of intellectual inquiry fostered by the Enlightenment of the 18th century to point out the inaccuracy, the inconsistency, and the downright impossibility of much of the accounts in both the Christian and Jewish scriptures. During this period, Charles Darwin published his groundbreaking inquiries that challenged basic Western assumptions about virtually everything having to do with the development of the physical world and the human race. And as I've said, it was the age of the great infidel, Robert Greene Ingersoll, who presided over what has been called the golden age of religious skepticism and unbelief that accompanied all of these developments. It's not accidental that Wallace wrote his book at this time. This is a huge topic and it's way beyond the scope of this paper, but let me suggest that Lew Wallace wrote Ben Hur in part to answer those attacks upon religious orthodoxy and to give to embattled Christians reasons to affirm and hold fast to their beliefs. At the basis of scientific method, the scientific method introduced by the Enlightenment is empiricism. The idea that all knowledge is based on sense experience. Another way of saying that is that all knowledge is based on observation, especially verified and repeated observation. Work with me. Faced with the attacks on the miraculous elements of the Gospels in the late 19th century, many defenders of Christian orthodoxy, not all of them conservative, pointed out that all of the miracles reported by the four evangelists in their Gospels were observed at the time by thousands of people. Wallace builds on that argument, and in his best-selling novel creates another eyewitness of the ministry of Jesus, miracles and all. Judah Ben Hur becomes the fifth evangelist, and the general's tale of the Christ becomes, for hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of Victorian Americans, the fifth gospel. Wallace is at great pains to make his young Prince of Judea an impeccably reliable witness. Judah Ben Hur is almost too perfect a son, brother, worker, Jew, friend. You want him just one little fault, but he doesn't. And as we have seen, he is intellectually curious and works mightily, the Victorians would probably say manfully. Now you see Satan at work. This one I tell you what, the first time that happened, like Joanne was over the record, I thought the world was coming to him because we were in the study. Wallace, okay. But as we have seen, Judah is intellectually curious and works mightily to puzzle out and to finally understand the miraculous things that he sees with his own eyes. He doesn't just let it sit. He works at it. He worries about it. It's a problem. Judah is in no sense superstitious or credulous, and he does not minimize the crucial importance of understanding the astounding acts that he sees Jesus perform. In other words, the Victorian reader of Ben Hur would have found in Wallace's ancient Jewish prince one who takes very, very seriously precisely the same intellectual questions and challenges that dominated late 19th century American culture. Moreover, Wallace embeds Judah's religious struggles in a narrative that is dominated to an astounding degree by detail. Detail. Details historical, geographical, cultural, social, physical, personal. Ben Hur was written just as the Victorian world was becoming obsessed with touring foreign climes, sometimes in person, but more often by way of the printed word. Ben Hur is one of those sources. Wallace's novel in places reads like a travelogue. And we need to talk about this for just a minute because this attention to detail is quite important as we conclude our topic tonight. And I'm going to start with the first line of the novel. You can tell a lot about the first lines of novels. While I was writing this, I came up with my 3 favorite first lines of novels. You might think about yours. And I'm going to test your literary acumen. Tell me what this is the first line from. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a man in possession of a good fortune must be in need of a wife.
Pride and Prejudice.
Can I get a witness? It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Tale of Two Cities. My favorite. Call me Ishmael. What's the first line again? Not exactly on everyone's. The first line of Ben Hur is not on everyone's. No one is going to say, well, here it is. Because it's actually revealing. Here we go. This is how this great novel begins. The Jebel es Zebula, I don't know how you pronounce it. The Jebel es Zubla is a mountain 50 miles or more in length, and so narrow that its tracery on the map gives it a likeness to a caterpillar crawling from the south to the north. Sexy, right? Really grabs your attention, makes you want to read. Point of fact, I just bet you that whole bunches of modern people don't get past that first line. But Wallace knew what he was doing. From the very first line of the novel, he wants his readers to feel as if they are literally entering the ancient world that is his subject. So, for instance, he describes in excruciating detail the desert in which the 3 wise men gather at the beginning of the novel. That's what's beginning. Then he describes the terrain and the camel and the little hoodoo that Balthasar rides on. He gives over an entire chapter to describing the men and women who hawk their wares at the Joppa Gate in Jerusalem. You learn more than you ever need to know about what a Roman trireme or galley ship looks like. At one point, even, in the Grove of Daphne, Judah Ben Hur himself becomes literally a tourist. So, he's not crazy, Wallace. By the time readers get to the novel's concluding section on the Passion of Christ, the important part, where it's all going, Wallace has accustomed them to receiving descriptions that are so detailed that they must be accurate and authentic. So, when Judah begins to testify about the ministry of Jesus and then follows him from Gethsemane to Golgotha, the reader has been trained, so to speak, to receive the witness of Wallace's filth gospel as truth. And it worked. Doing research on his fan mail is just fascinating. Readers came to believe that the Hur family actually existed. I mean, lots of them. And that the incident at the well actually is part of the gospel narrative. One woman wrote to ask how long Judah and Esther lived and did they have any more kids. And I sometimes suspect that Lew Wallace almost came to believe himself that his characters were real. And I'm very serious about that, actually. After his tour of duty in Turkey, Lew and Susan visited the Holy Land for the first time. In How I Came to Write Ben Hur, he proudly reported that when he and Susan, quote, proceeded over the exact route followed by my hero, they saw the rock at which the mother and Jesus and sister waited for Christ to come and heal them of their leprosy. What? The very rock? They're not real, Lew. Think about that. That's actually one of the strangest sentences that Lew Wallace ever wrote. It's very revealing. At some level, those people became real for him. That may not be all that unusual. Yeah, probably not. He concluded, as Lew would, boastfully, at every point of the journey over which I traced my Judah's steps in Jerusalem, I found the descriptive details true to the existing objects and scenes. I find no reason for making a single change in the text of the book. Thank you very much. Okay, last paragraph. Thank you for your attention. When I was here last October, I spoke briefly about the community of national and international scholars that are beginning to be interested in various aspects of Ben Hur. And that is all to the good, and I love them and I welcome their interest. But for the most part, these scholars use the novel to study some particular aspect of American culture that interests them in particular. Almost none of them, however, is trying to answer the most obvious question. Why was this novel so popular? Why did Americans buy it and read it in such numbers? I can almost guarantee you that it was not to learn more about late Victorian gender relations, or race relations, or the economy. In this lecture, then, I have suggested an answer. Ben Hur was so popular because Wallace's tale of the Christ enabled believers to hold on to and to affirm their own faith in the face of unprecedented criticism. This is not a particular popular conclusion in the modern academy because, one, it's about religion, and two, it's kind of what people at the time said. Right? But for this scholar, at any rate, it's as close as I can get to the true source of the great popularity of the General's remarkable book. Thank you very much. So ask me questions.
Do you think
What was Lew's source of his education about Jewish experience?
Oh, Lord. In the library, there's lots of it. And he also went to the Library of Congress. He became, he published Fair God in 73. And he'd already written this thing about the wise men. But he visited the Boston Library, he went to the Library of Congress. And because it's back then, the number of books that you had available of these things were finite. And if you read his source, you didn't intend to do this, but this gives me a chance to tell you what I learned, my biggest impression of actually reading the book. I don't know why it didn't make an impression on me when I listened to it. But when I read the book, I was overwhelmed, actually, by the General's ostentatious display of the knowledge that he had gained in his, well, he's an autodidact. The self-taught person often is very insufferable because they're going to display, and see where that he just displays it everywhere. Now, do I know exactly where he learned? For instance, when this is before, I don't remember what it is. At one point, the reader has to slot. This is where I feel most sympathetic about with the readers, because at one point you have to endure Wallace is telling you all that he has learned from some musty book in the Library of Congress or in his own library, the Boston Library, or whatever, about the successions of the high priests right before his novel begins. And you know what? It's just really boring. I don't know if I told you if you ever heard my story about my older sister. I have 5 sisters. And my oldest one is my favorite sister, and she raised us all that kind of stuff. And I gave her a copy of Ben Hur to read a long time ago when I first started doing this. And I came back to see her the next time, and she said, you gave me back the book. She said, Howard, I love you. I don't love you that much. Here's the question. Who are you?
I'm Jason Boyer.
And where are you from?
I'm originally from Peru, Indiana, but I live here in Crawfordsville.
You were taking notes. Why were you taking notes?
Well, I'm a lay minister, and I was going to talk, maybe use this for a sermon. I'm a member of the First United Methodist Church, but I've taken lay minister, and I'm preaching at my home church, Peru First Church of God.
Okay. All right, so your question.
Well, do you think he had Anabaptist sentiments?
Explain your question to the audience.
Anabaptists are basically Mennonites, Amish, anti-war sentiments. Do you think he felt bad about killing people in the war and the controversy of his kind of grant and him being moved out of the war? I'm a big Lincoln and Civil War buff too. And
see, second question, Civil War.
So
we talked about this.
and he went to a Methodist church, even though he was not a member. So it's a historic peace church.
Okay.
So do you
But
think?
my honest response is that never occurred. That never, ever occurred to me. And I suspect, even if I really thought about it alone, I couldn't sort of tell you what his basic religious sentiments might be, because he's just so reticent about it. But on the other hand, how do we know about Balthazar? How do we know? You know what I'm talking about? Balthazar, do you know who Weber is? The great sociologist, Max Weber? He created a category. There are a few human beings who are, oh my God, I've forgotten. It's finally happened. Let's go to the group. I don't remember the phrase, the Weberian phrase. Oh well.
Come back to you.
Yeah. Oh, it probably won't actually. And if it does, it'll be at 3 o'clock night. Holiday Inn. There are a few people who are born resonating with religion. It's kind of like a savant. Someone who by nature simply is inclined to the religious vibrations. Balthazar is a religious, it may be genius. I think the word is genius.
Savant.
What is it?
Savant.
Well, that's not Weber's word. Oh well, who cares? Okay. But who invented Balthazar? Where did he come from? Lew invented Balthazar. And if someone asks you, did Lew Wallace become converted to religion? He may have already been there. Because somehow, and I don't know, no one is ever going to know how this could have happened. But somehow, this military man who will just drive you crazy talking about strategy and everything, he could come up with some of the most profound insights into the religious experience that I have ever read. And Balthazar is one of the great religious figures in literature.
Didn't the Sultan become very good friends with him, and he didn't want him to leave, and he amazed at how he could write about the Holy Land, and how much he knew about it, not be visiting.
That wasn't a very satisfactory answer. But actually, the real answer is that I am so convinced that the answer would be no, because I never heard of it. I never thought about it. And of course, if I had thought about it, it must not be important. What else? Talk to me.
In an earlier,
Richard.
in an earlier tidbit that came out from Larry, mentioned that Sir Elder Wallace was very active in the Central Christian Church in Indianapolis, which comes out of the Reformation, but the Great Awakening of 1820. And I wondered, was he raised in that
No,
church? Or?
he wasn't raised in anything. You know who raised Lew Wallace? The guys down the river. The rivermen.
He attended the church,
Well,
but he was very outspoken, saying he read the speeches of the great ministers of the day, not for what they were saying, but how they were saying it. He was more interested in their cadence, their sentence structure, and not so much the argument. So he would go to church, but I think it went right over his head on purpose, he was not.
Well, it may not be going over his head. It's just that he didn't resonate with it. That's just not who he was. I mean, he was really an irascible kid. He wasn't very interested in these kinds of things, but something happened. If you really want to get interested in something like that, read The Fair God and the other novel, The Prince of India, because all the complexities about religion. You think Ben Hur is a trial? The complexities that you discover in Ben Hur, the Fair God is about the conquest of Mexico by the Aztecs, by the Spanish, and by the destruction of native religions there. And then, of course, the Prince of India is his take on the Wandering Jew story. So this incredible man, who you can't get a hold of at all, because he simply never writes about it, except when he writes. You know, that's one of the things that these new scholars don't quite understand. They want to be able to go and read someone's writings or their correspondence and all that kind of stuff. Or they want to find documents that show them precisely what's going on here, that, or the other. But if you're going to study Lew Wallace, you have got to read the novels and take them seriously. That's why this whole thing about conversion has simply gotten lost in the adaptation tradition. I mean, I hope to come back next year and talk to you guys about the adaptation tradition. And because in some sense, my most important take on it, my most strongest take on it, is that the novel has not been well served by the adaptation tradition. That the adaptations, by definition and perhaps unavoidably, have to cut. They have to cut the complexity, they have to cut the cast of characters. They have to cut the complexities. And they have to cut the ways in which various characters and their interactions interact with others. For instance, I have not mentioned tonight Eros, the conflict in Judah's heart between Eros, the Egyptian temptress, Balthazar's daughter, remarkable woman, and Esther, the practically perfect daughter of Simonides. In the novel, as Judah tries to figure out king or savior, king or savior, king or savior, we will have a chapter. Next chapter, Esther or Eros, and they interact with each other constantly. And as he makes one decision in one area of his life, he's led to make the decision in the other area of his life. That all gets lost. And the whole thing about raising the troops and everything, was that all news to you? Or did you know that he did that? It disappears after the silent film. There's no sense at all in 1959 film that Judah was a disciple of Jesus, because he wasn't. But when Jesus. comforting, actually, to a Christian who's trying to figure out in 1892 all this criticism about the miraculous sources, about the miraculous nature of the foundations of the Christian gospel. What else? Yes?
I was
Jamie.
I was really intrigued by your observations on detail
Uh-huh.
and empiricism and pragmatism.
Uh-huh.
Wasn't it really the case in the 19th century, certainly in England and America, that the novel, of course, these novels that are so long were originally published serially.
Well, not
But they-
all were. Ben Hur
Well,
was.
many were in England though,
Yeah.
but they also doubled as encyclopedias.
Of course they did.
Because you look at, Melville's Moby Dick, it's
Mhm.
huge chapters on rope and sailing.
Uh-huh.
Les Miserables, they're detail
Beautiful.
after detail about horses, about grass, and so I always think Ben Hur, reading that, is very much, Lew Wallace is very much in that tradition.
Jamie, I wish you could have been in that hotel room with me as I tried to
Why?
figure out exactly how I was going to say that.
They would have thought we were crazy.
But it is
No, I'm
it
not
is
saying anything
and
new.
the,
I'm just I liked what you said
the
about the
whale
details.
stuff, though, in Moby Dick, is every bit as horrible as some of the
Yeah.
theological stuff. But did you sort of understand how much of the actual verbiage of Ben Hur is given over to this Simonides Balthasar debate? Chapters, I think there's about 12. It's just amazing. And it simply disappears. And really the essence of the book then kind of disappears with it. Because the essence of the book is the conversion. You know something else that happens in the adaptation? Is that Judah ceases to be a 17-year-old. Every time they have a Judah, he gets older. In 1959, Charlton Heston is 37 years old, I think. Ben Hur, Judah, is a 17-year-old kid. Ben Hur is a coming-of-age novel. And it gets lost entirely if you are already a grandpa. What else? Talk to me. Yes, ma'am.
Ben Hur is my absolute favorite book.
Who?
Ben Hur is my absolute favorite book,
You
and
must be very strange.
my students told me that. What precisely was the relationship between Messala and Judah? Because I have read comments that people have said that they had a certain relationship, and I don't see that at all in the things that I've read in the times I've read that book.
You know, one of the craziest things about this 2016 movie is that, well, let's go back. Well, first of all, in the 1959 movie, and you probably know, Gore Vidal, you know the Gore Vidal story?
No.
Hold on. Well, in the 1959 film, there's a very serious homoerotic dimension to it. I think I've talked about this here in this room. And Gore Vidal, a gay man, claims to have put it in. And the intensity, because he says you can't understand the intensity of the relationship if it's just over religion or something like that. And he had particularly if you got someone like Judah Ben Hur chewing up, Charlton Heston chewing up every scene that he ever gets into with his teeth. So there was a great outcry about that from Charlton Heston more than anything else. But he said that Gore Vidal said that he spoke with the director Lee Wyler, and they decided to talk to Stephen Gord, who played Messala, and play this as kind of like this is a thwarted love affair and that kind of stuff. And you want to start back up, and Judas want to start back up, and they of course didn't tell Chuck. And that's where this scene comes from. you have a vision of the scene?
Not really. I've
Okay.
I've seen
Okay.
it in 1959
Okay.
movie once.
Well,
a long
watch
time
the
ago.
scene sometimes. Watch the scene. Stephen Boyd is caressing his arm and everything. He's looking kind of love-stricken or whatever. But you know, there's a great outcry about that. And in the last 30 years, the story, Wallace's story, has become a favorite of conservative evangelical Christians. And the one thing that I can say, and I will have to come next year, the one thing that I can say about the last 30 years in this development is that the one thing that they all are trying to do in one way or another is to erase any homoerotic dimension. And in various ways, they do that. In the 2016 film, they even have them reuniting, and they have Ben Masala marry Tirza, right? Is that what happens? Yeah, like you said. How many of you saw that 2016 film? Yeah, whatever. Okay. But there is nothing in the novel at all that would have been any insights. Wallace would have.
Okay, I wondered
So-
if I had missed something.
Oh, no. The thought of Lew Wallace writing a homoerotic focus is hurting my head. What else?
Well, before we let you go, Count of Monte Cristo.
What about it?
Well, we had a chance to visit yesterday when we were
Ask
talking.
your question.
Do you think Wallace in any way shaped the story around that story?
Now, do you understand Larry's question?
No.
How many have ever seen the Count of Monte Cristo movie or anything? You know, how many of you know basically the story of the Count of Monte Cristo? Alexander Dumas. Here is if there is any model for Ben Hur, it is the Count of Monte Cristo. A young man is greatly wronged and betrayed by his friends, and he is sent to prison, the Chateau d'If. He miraculously meets a priest in there who gives him all of this knowledge and everything, and then he miraculously dies. So the count, the guy who becomes the Count, Edmond Dantes, right? And he gets out in the shroud that they had the priest for. And he then becomes very fabulously wealthy, and then goes back to his hometown and begins to wreak havoc on vengeance on his people. And he destroys himself in the doing. There's very little redemption. Is there? I don't remember how much redemption there is. Anyhow. The interesting thing about the Count of Monte Cristo is that it was made into a very successful play that was seen, I don't have the figures with me, but I wouldn't be surprised if it ran longer than, I don't know. But it was the only competition that the stage Ben Hur had. And a man named, can anyone tell me the name of the actor who played the Count of Monte Cristo? James Tyrone. James Tyrone. Ruined his career by just playing the Count of Monte Cristo for 30 years and all of that stuff. So that's another way in which the Count of Monte Cristo is like Ben Hur. Yes.
I would just comment that if there's anyone here who hasn't ever read it, to dig in, I would totally recommend them to
Yeah.
try to do it. Like anything that's difficult, it's fine.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. How much did we agree on? And also, I'm going to say now something that Stephanie probably won't like, and Larry might not either. But they said that as you're reading the novel, you can either read Carol Wallace's adaptation or read Ben Hur. Don't you dare. You live in Crawfordsville, Indiana. I'm going to check on you. Everyone in this town needs to have read that novel. Or moved. No.
Thank you very much. We do have refreshments here, and I know Dr. Miller would visit with anybody that as alternative.
Thank you very much.
Okay.